massive investment by the Ravens to protect Lamar Jackson has just been revealed. And at first glance, it looks exactly like what this team needed. We're talking millions invested in protection, an entire draft focused on offense, and a sequence of decisions that, on paper, put the quarterback in the best possible situation. But once you start connecting every piece, from that unexpected draft pick to the philosophy behind those decisions, something doesn't fully add up. Because in the middle of all that heavy investment, there's a missing piece that completely changes how you read this entire offseason. And once you notice that detail, the question stops being how much the Ravens invested and becomes why, even after investing so much, they still let this happen. There's a specific moment in this draft that, to me, explains more than any press conference or public statement. And it happens right at pick 80. That was the point where the situation felt completely clear. The Ravens had an obvious need on the interior offensive line, especially at center. This had already been treated as a priority before the draft even started. It wasn't a surface-level read. When that moment came, I honestly expected a more direct decision. The kind of pick that solves an immediate problem and brings stability to the structure of the team. Instead, Baltimore went in the complete opposite direction and selected Jacoby Lane, a wide receiver who, looking at it objectively, didn't address any of the team's biggest needs at that moment. And this is where the detail that changes everything comes in. And to me, this is the core of the decision. Lane wasn't selected because of immediate fit or tactical need. He was selected because of his physical profile. His 10.5-inch hands put him in an extremely rare category, and that carries massive weight in how the Ravens evaluate talent. And this isn't speculation. Eric DeCosta has made this mindset clear over the years. We're always going to bet on traits. That line sums up exactly what happened here. This says a lot about how the team approached this draft. It wasn't reactive, trying to fix holes in the roster. It was a disciplined approach rooted in a very well-defined philosophy. Even with a glaring need right in front of them, the decision was to bet on ceiling, on potential, on something they believe is harder to find long-term. And once you start looking at this as part of a pattern, not an isolated decision, the entire draft reads differently. Because this move doesn't stand alone. It starts to make more sense when you realize there's a bigger logic guiding everything Baltimore did over those 3 days. After that pick at 80, it becomes impossible to look at this draft without connecting it directly to the front office philosophy. This doesn't feel improvised. It doesn't feel like a misread of the board. It feels like pure execution of a model that was already defined before the draft even began. And that model has a very clear name: Eric DeCosta. Over the years, he's consistently shown how he evaluates talent. It's not about filling immediate holes. It's not about reacting to what the roster needs in the moment. It's about betting on rare physical traits, things you simply can't teach later. When you go back to the Jacoby Lane pick with that context, the entire perspective shifts. It wasn't out of place. It was perfectly aligned with that pattern. A player with 10.5-inch hands doesn't come around often, and within this philosophy, that kind of attribute ends up carrying more value than filling an urgent need like center. And here's the key point. Baltimore didn't deviate from its philosophy for a single moment. Even with an obvious gap in the roster, the team stayed disciplined in its evaluation process. That shows they trust their system far more than outside pressure or the obvious rid of the situation. Once you understand that, the draft starts to make a lot more sense as a whole. Because that logic wasn't limited to one pick. It starts to show up repeatedly, especially when you look at what they did with the receiving group. As you move through the draft, it becomes clear that the Lane pick wasn't isolated. To me, it was just the first step of a much more aggressive shift. And this is where context really matters. The Ravens receiving group was coming off a very underwhelming 2025 season, finishing among the least productive in the NFL in total receptions. That's not a minor detail. It directly impacts how the offense functions, and Baltimore didn't make small adjustments. It wasn't one piece here, another there. The team essentially rebuilt the entire room in a single draft. Along with Lane, they added Elijah Sarrett, a consistent producer at Indiana, plus tight ends Matthew Hibner and Josh Cuevas. That's 4 new targets entering the offensive structure at the same time. To me, that completely changes the dynamic of the offense. Because it's not just about individual talent, it's about volume of options. You get more formation variation, more pre-snap flexibility, and more freedom in play calling. In practice, that changes how defenses have to react to the Ravens. And there's something people often underestimate. When you add multiple pass catchers at once, you're not just improving depth, you're changing identity. The offense becomes less predictable and gains far more pathways within each play. When you combine that with the focus on physical traits, it becomes clear Baltimore wasn't thinking small. But before any of this could translate on the field, there was a move that, to me, supported this entire strategy from the start. Before the draft even began, the Ravens had already made a move that, to me, carries much more weight when you look at everything together. The 3-year, $30 million deal for John Simpson wasn't just a routine free agency signing. It was a strategic decision that defined how the team would approach the rest of the offseason. Simpson returns to the left guard position after starting there in 2024, and that brings immediate stability to the interior offensive line. And here's the key point. It's not about being spectacular. It's about being reliable. It's about making sure the basics work, making sure the interior doesn't become a problem snap after snap. To me, this completely changes how you read the draft. Because once you handle interior protection at a basic level beforehand, you give yourself the freedom to be more aggressive later. You're not entering the draft under pressure to fix everything. You can chase upside, think about ceiling, and focus on what the offense can become, not just what it needs to fix. And there's one detail that makes all the difference: the order of decisions. Baltimore didn't react to what was left on the board. They prepared ahead of time. They secured a functional base on the offensive line and then used the draft to pursue a different objective. That's not accidental. That's planning. And when you connect this move with the offensive additions, the overall strategy starts to look much more aggressive than it seems at first glance. When you look at the full set of picks, it becomes clear that the Ravens didn't enter this draft with the mindset of simply fixing problems. This wasn't fine-tuning the roster. It was a deliberate attempt to raise the maximum level this offense can reach. The amount of resources directed toward the offensive side leaves very little room for interpretation. It's not common to see a team invest this much volume, multiple receivers, interior line help, complementary pieces, without trying to change how the offense operates in practice. This goes far beyond depth. And there's a key point here. When you add multiple offensive pieces at once, you're not just increasing options, you're changing how the system behaves. The playbook expands, formations multiply, pre-snap reads become more complex. That puts more pressure on defenses and opens more possibilities within each play. This signals a clear shift in approach. Instead of prioritizing safety and predictability, Baltimore leaned into variation, unpredictability, and volume of options. It's a construction that raises the ceiling, but also demands more synchronization for everything to work. When you connect that with the prior investment in the line and the profile of the players selected, it becomes clear this wasn't just an active draft. It was a directed one. And that direction points straight to the most important name in this offense. The most important name in this offense. All right, we're already past the halfway point of this video. But before we keep going, I noticed you haven't hit the like button yet. And that really matters, because it helps YouTube keep showing Ravens content like this to you. So if you enjoy staying updated with the latest Ravens news, analysis, and everything happening around the team, go ahead and hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow, and it's completely free. I appreciate it. When you connect free agency and the draft, there's really no way around it. The Ravens made one of the most aggressive offseason moves to build around Lamar Jackson. And it wasn't just about quality, it was about volume. The team committed $30 million to John Simpson and used all 11 of its draft picks. That's not common. That level of investment shows clear intent. This isn't about small adjustments. It's about reshaping the entire offensive environment around the quarterback. And when you look at how that investment was distributed, the pattern becomes even clearer. First, establish a minimum level of stability and interior protection. Then direct almost every remaining resource toward increasing the number of offensive weapons. That creates a structure where the quarterback has both more time and more options. To me, this suggests Baltimore is trying to maximize Lamar's current window. This isn't just about long-term development. It's about extracting more from the offense right now, while the quarterback is in his physical and technical prime. But the more you analyze that volume of investment, the more one thing starts to stand out. Because even with all those resources being used, there's one specific area of the roster that simply wasn't addressed. And this is where, to me, the entire draft shifts in meaning. Because after breaking down every pick, every investment, every direction taken, you realize the team's biggest need went into the process and came out exactly the same. Center was treated as a priority before the draft began. This wasn't an outside narrative. It was an internal structural issue. The interior of the offensive line needed adjustment, needed a clearer solution, and that simply didn't happen. Baltimore went through 3 full days of the draft without selecting a single player at the position. 0. And that's not a small detail when you're talking about a team that made 11 picks. When you have that kind of volume and still ignore a central need, it becomes a strategic decision, not an oversight. To me, that creates a very sharp contrast. On one side, you have an offense with more weapons, more depth, more possibilities. On the other, you have the exact point that connects all of it, the interior of the line, still surrounded by uncertainty, and in the end, that absence weighs just as much as all the additions. Because no matter how much the offensive ceiling has increased, if the foundation doesn't hold, the impact shows up exactly where the team can least afford mistakes. What this Ravens offseason shows is a clear movement. The team decided to be aggressive in elevating the offense and giving Lamar Jackson more tools than ever. The investment was heavy, the strategy was disciplined, and there is a real increase in offensive potential when you connect all the decisions. But there's an undeniable counterpoint. While the ceiling of the offense rises, the foundation still raises concerns. And that's exactly where problems tend to show up in the biggest moments of the season. The roster is more explosive, more versatile, but not necessarily more secure where it matters most. And I want to hear from you. Does this investment truly take the Ravens to another level? Or could ignoring the center position end up costing them down the line? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you're a true Ravens fan and love keeping up with everything happening around the team, don't leave this video without sharing it with a friend who's just as passionate. They're definitely going to enjoy this. See those videos on your screen right now? I picked the first one especially for you, and the other is recommended by YouTube. Go check them out, and I'll see you in the next video.